Content isn't everything. It's the only thing. Learn from the smartest minds in media as they discuss how businesses, brands, influencers, and media outlets are leveraging content to reach fans better than ever before. Presented by Jack Media. Welcome to the Media Mindset, and today on this episode we have a very special guest, and that is a friend of mine and a multi-talented creative who works in post-production, is also a bit of a major celebrity.
Wow. Oof.
In the podcasting space, both in the New York area and also worldwide, working with some very cool brands and some very cool spaces, and that is Josh Perault. Josh, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me here and flattering me right on the start. I'm okay with this.
We got to start off on it. We got to butter you up to begin, and then it's all downhill from there.
Oh, well, thank you for the warning. I do appreciate that.
Now, Josh, you work in post-production for film and television, but I actually know you through the New York City podcasting community, specifically on the fiction side. There's some really, really cool creative fiction podcasts coming out of the city.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you got involved with that community, because it's a pretty interesting story.
Sure. Before the podcast that I'm working on currently, which I'll get to, I worked on the Once and Future Nerd with Christian Madera and Zach Glass. They're the creators of that. That is a audio drama based in a fantasy setting that is more satirical. So like the elves are super racist, and it's about people coming from our world to their world and realizing that structure just doesn't work. And it's a real good look into this world that we're in using a fantasy lens. It's pretty nifty. I worked with Christian. I work for Deluxe and Company 3 here in the city. And Christian was working on this podcast, and that's where I met him. And I kept talking to him about it and go, hey, do you need help with that? Do you need help with that? You sure? You sure? You sure? Sounds awesome. And then a year later, he said, yes, I do need help with that. Please edit. And I went, cool. I guess I need to learn how to edit. So I never done that before in audio, so I should have learned that beforehand. So I learned on the spot using Final Cut, the best audio editing program. Yeah, the laughing is legit, but that's what I used. And after a while of that, we were playing D&D at home. After listening to like Critical Role and listening to like Drunks and Dragons and some of the other podcasts, we wanted to start 5th edition. So my friend Bucky and I went, why don't we start just recording? And if we want to release it, we'll release it later. And we did. So we just recorded for us and not really for anything in particular. And then the first podcast gathering, which is one of the things that I met you at, David, but the first one was in December of 2016, I believe. And after a bunch of alcohol and seeing some very prolific people and meeting some good friends of mine for the first time, including like Julia Schaffini and Zach Valenti and Gabrielle Urbina and just Kristen DiMercurio, there's everybody there that you could think of in the New York City podcasting scene. All of that creativity got me thinking of like, maybe I should just pitch Christian if he can just host a pilot episode for us. And he said yes. Why don't you have it ready in a month? So we went, okay, I guess that's what we're doing now. And then our first episode released with them in January 2017, and we've been releasing bi-weekly ever since, except for like our 3-month gap between campaigns.
So talk a little bit about that podcast and its growth over the past 2 years, almost 3 years now.
Yeah, 2.5 years. So that podcast is called Taking Initiative. It is a Dungeons and Dragons or D&D 5e or 5th edition podcast. The 5th edition is just what version of the game that we are playing. There are a lot that are out there, and there's so many different styles of it. Ours is more of the audio drama feel. So we play the game. We record it. It's usually like a 3-hour session, and we'll cut that into 2 to 3 different episodes based on what the content is, and we heavily edit it. So any dice rolling, any silences, any like as much ums and uhs as possible, we rip out and throw a bunch of music underneath it. Sometimes we have sound effects, we have the theme songs, end credits. We make it as much of a production as possible to not have it feel like you're just sitting in on someone's game, but to actually be enjoying the story of it. Most of us from the podcast work in post-production. So for us, this is something that we are applying our work to for fun.
Very cool. So over the course of time, as you've developed these podcasts, what are some lessons you've learned, like from, I guess both a production side and both, things that have informed your creative decision making?
One thing we learned very early on is not all jokes are for everybody. And it wasn't something that we necessarily heard audience feedback for. It was more so getting to experience what we did for a second time. And what I mean by that is after we recorded it, we had to edit it. So we were forced to listen to ourselves. And it causes you to have a very critical view of what you're about to put out into the world and going, wow, I sound like a terrible person there. Maybe, one, I shouldn't be talking like that. And two, maybe I should be careful what we put out there. So we were passing some jokes around to different friends in the space to go, is this okay? Because we do like to joke around a lot, and some things are good and some things are not good at all. And over time, we've become, I think, better people from it because we've got to actually hear ourselves talk and go, maybe we should kind of tone it down on this, kind of thing. We were also running a campaign which was very dark. It's called the Curse of Strahd campaign, which is all about vampires and like a Dracula story. So some things can be incredibly dark. There's a windmill in there where they grind up kids that they bought from their parents and take the bones and make treats out of them. And those treats give you bad dreams. That is something that is a little rough to listen to. Yeah. So we need to be cautious of how we're presenting that to really not, put like a too much making fun of point of view onto it, and more so maybe add some comedy underneath to help support the darkness. So we've found that balance throughout. Mm-hmm. Other things from that is don't use Google Hangouts to record because you will have some terrible audio for the first 3 episodes because you can't edit everybody's track individually. Yeah. You also capture all the internet noises. Mm-hmm. So we stuck away from that. We started using Zoom for all of our individual recordings. We all record in different spaces. So some of our members are in Virginia, one's in New Jersey, 3 are in New York, and one's in Georgia. So we all just do an internet thing, hit record, stop, and then we send all the individual tracks to somebody to edit down. So we learned that lesson pretty early on. I'd say those are the 2 big ones.
Now, what kind of reception have you seen for that podcast? Has it been strictly within the Dungeons and Dragons, D&D, role-playing and board game communities? Or do you hear from listeners who maybe have never played D&D before, but get into your podcast and are interested in it just for the production value, the storytelling, the audio drama nature of it? I guess there are 2 sides as to why people might want to listen in.
Absolutely. Most of which I believe come from the tabletop role-playing community. Specifically D&D. We have some people that don't play D&D that listen because they have some issue with maybe how the rules work or not really thrilled to do that system, or they play a different system like Call of Cthulhu or Masks or something. But they're interested that way. We have a very small part, at least from my knowledge, that are not from that community. One of which is like my dad. My dad has never played D&D, but he listens to the show, and he's always like, what does this mean? What does this rule do? Oh, that's very cool. How'd you do that? So I get to talk shop with him of like telling somebody how the game works for the first time. It's mostly the tabletop role-playing community, though, because I think when they hear that it's an actual play podcast, the immediate thought is, oh, I don't know how to play the game. I won't understand it. But we try our best to explain the rules and go through the steps because some of our players are also new to D&D. So by teaching our players, it also helps teach the audience. And we try to keep those moments in for that reason.
You're a veteran of post-production and at this point, a number of very popular podcasts. And I do want to get to in a second some of the work you've done with some brands to bring them into the podcasting space. And we talked earlier in this episode already about the New York City podcasting community, which is just a group of creators who come together at fairly regular intervals to share their experiences, to meet people who might want to come on to their podcast, to work together, find collaboration, and also to help spread the word and actually do a little bit of guerrilla marketing within that community. What have you found are some of the best lessons when it comes to marketing and getting the word out about these niche podcasts?
that is always a very hard thing to do, because a lot of people, from my understanding, like that first podcast outing, I have a bit of social anxiety. It's not like a, definitely confirmed by doctor thing, and it's me going, oh, I'm really anxious. I'm in a social situation. Oh boy. And I found out at that first gathering, when after a couple of drinks, I mentioned that, and everybody in the room went, yes, me too. We all have that thing of, I don't necessarily want to talk about myself. And that's really hard when you have to market your podcast. If you don't want to talk about your stuff or your achievements or put yourself out there, the ability to expand your audience goes down. So a lot of the lessons I learned was I just needed to bite the bullet on some of that and just be active in social media in some respect to help spread the word. By making friends with some of the other podcasts and spreading each other's word has been wonderful. I was incredibly lucky with some of the connections I've made and experiences I've been in, just from just being there at the perfect time, or meeting people at the exact moment that I needed to meet them. As an example, right after that podcast outing, a couple months later, I went to one of those people's gatherings. And there is where we got Zach Valenti from World 359 to play our villain, because I just asked him at this random party. And I met my girlfriend. Obviously not at the time. That would have been really weird. But later on, hooked up, kind of a deal. And these little tiny meetings over time have proven that just going to these things, or talking to that one person, or saying that one sentence and not keeping to yourself, has really allowed things to flow, not just for me, not just for the show, but also for other people. Because I love talking about everyone else's shows that I like to listen to, because what do humans like to do more than talk about the stuff that they enjoy?
Very cool. You mentioned meeting some important people through the podcasting community, and I'm just curious, what other impacts has the podcasting community made on your life as you've moved further into it?
Well, the podcast life itself at some points are more busy than even my film and TV life, mostly just because of editing and recording schedules, guesting on other shows, having guests on ours, or now like trying to make schedules work for other people. So I'm now moving my life around to try and fit all of this quote unquote extracurricular activity thing, which is more like a second job. Mm-hmm. We learned very early on, and one of the biggest bits of advice that I've heard from everybody is, if you are making content, stick to a schedule, no matter what. So if you're releasing on a Monday, and 2 weeks later you're releasing on Monday, and the next time is Monday, you stay on that Monday. And if you're going to change schedules, you let everybody know way ahead of time, and you make sure that that goes very smoothly. Because if it doesn't come out and you miss that one time, maybe it's okay. But you miss a couple more, people will stop having that automatic reflex in their head of going, oh, it's a new episode today. And then you start to lose your audience. That was by far the biggest lesson I learned, but also causes the most workload, because if you are not going to make that deadline, you are now staying up to do it. Most of the time where I was doing the podcast, before more recent events happened, I also have a kid. So it was go to work, come home, make sure he goes to bed after he passes out. After my girlfriend at the time passes out, then I stay up until midnight, 1 o'clock editing. Then I go to sleep, wake up, do the same thing the next day. There was no free time. Whatever video games I used to play just didn't exist anymore. Nowadays, it's a little bit more lenient, but still it takes up a good portion of time. And you need to be enjoying what you're doing, where you're going to be hating every second that you're not doing something else.
When we'd had some conversations before, and the last time we spoke, I was really, really impressed as to how you leveraged your existing work in the podcast community with something that I would say is probably the nerd's dream in many ways. And that is working with a particular brand that's a maker of a lot of my favorite games growing up, and that's Wizards of the Coast. And you've done some really, really impressive work with them to kind of pull their company's presence into the podcasting realm. Can you talk about how you first connected with them and how that relationship has evolved?
Sure, absolutely. The event that Dave is referring to is the Podcast of series that Wizards of the Coast now does. As of, I think it's been a year and a half now, 2 years. Ooh, it's been a while. It started with Podcast of Annihilation. The reason that came about was before that event, there was an event called the Stream of Annihilation, which Wizards of the Coast had to help announce their newest module or book adventure.
And just as background for folks listening, Wizards of the Coast is a very storied game maker.
Yes.
So they own the intellectual property right now, and they make Dungeons and Dragons. They also make Magic the Gathering, a number of other very popular tabletop card games, role-playing games, you name it. So they're in many ways like the mega brand when it comes to this gaming community.
Yeah, whenever anyone's holding a 5th edition D&D book in their hands, it is Wizards of the Coast work that's going on. So the Stream of Annihilation ended up happening, and they brought in a whole bunch of different streamers from the community. I forgot exactly who was at that one, but it would be similar to High Rollers from the UK. They had a couple different celebrities. In some of the recent ones, it's been Matthew Lillard, Joe Manganiello, Deborah Ann Wall, the Critical Role people.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt, they've done some work with, I believe. I don't know if it was for that series.
It wasn't for that series, but yes.
So celebrities, actual mainstream celebrities playing what might previously be considered niche card games, role-playing games, tabletop games.
Yeah, there's been a couple series on YouTube with Terry Crews was playing, Vin Diesel. I think there was somebody from Game of Thrones as well that got brought in. There's a lot of people who play, and it's not just because, D&D is the famous thing to do now, I'm going to play. It's more it's now acceptable for me to tell people that this is what I used to do for all these years. Like Joe Manganiello, who is this huge dude married to Sofia Vergara, played Flash Thompson in the original Spider-Man movie back in the early 2000s. He has now a clothing line called Death Saves that is featuring all this D&D content. Matthew Lillard now owns a company with some of his best friends called Beetle and Grimm's, where they give they sell different high quality products for the different modules releasing. These big celebrity people who you grew up watching are big nerds just like us. And it's wonderful to watch. And we got to see that on stream when they were announcing the Tomb of Annihilation module. And very shortly thereafter, I was on a stream where we were talking about that stream. And that night, I went to bed and went, why can't they do that with podcasts, though? And then the next day, that question stayed with me. And I said, well, why not podcasts? So I went to work, and I was pacing around, as I tend to do when I can't get something out of my head. And Bucky, who's my best friend for the last 18, 19 years now, and I also work with, and he's a co-owner of the podcast, he saw me pacing, and he knows me very well, and said, what's on your mind? I'm like, I want to send Wizards of the Coast a message to do a podcasting event. He's like, okay, so do it. I went, yeah, sure, dude. Yeah, I'll go write that up right now. And I did. Very nerve-wracking kind of email, and I didn't quite know who to send it to. So I sent it to the Wizards D&D Twitter handle. They had their DMs open. I sent it to them, and I went, well, good luck. And I heard nothing for 2 days, which was not unexpected. I did not expect to hear a single word from them.
This is like if you're a basketball fan sending an unsolicited message to Nike and being like, let's see what happens. I mean, that's the same kind of level here for this particular community.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went into it going, let's hope, let's see. We don't have the viewership to really back it up. It's just more of, hey, hello, I'm a fan and also a podcaster. I would just like to see other podcasters out here because there's some great people that are out there. Not even really referring to myself. I think the Adventure Zone was going on at that point in time. Again, Drunks and Dragons was going on. There was a whole bunch that are out there. Dungeon Drunks. I know, similar, different podcast. So I wasn't really expecting an answer. And then I was like, maybe as a last-ditch effort, I'll send something to Greg Tito. Greg Tito, for those who don't know, he's one of the hosts for Dragon Talk, which is Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons news podcast. That's where everyone gets all their D&D news from. And he's basically their PR guy in some respect.
And that's like he's an official. That's officially coming from Wizards of the Coast.
Yes.
That's like a Wizards of the Coast property.
Absolutely. So I was like, maybe I'll do that, and then couldn't find any way to do that. I couldn't find his email. I couldn't find, like, his DMs weren't open, understandably so. So I brought up to Bucky, and he said, well, just try to send it to him. So I was thinking about it. And then I just went onto Twitter and said, hey, Greg, I have a proposition for something I can't talk about on Twitter concerning podcasts. DM me? And he did. And he said, sure, what's up? And I just copy pasted my pitch to Dungeons and Dragons, put it in there, changed where it said WotC to Greg. WotC is Wizards of the Coast, just shorthand, and sent it. And from there, Greg said, this is a great idea. Let's set up a call. I was like, oh, Jesus. Okay, well, this is the thing now. Very similar to like when I pitched the thing to Christian, and Christian said, sure, we need it in a month. Greg was like, let's set up a call. Let's figure out how to do this. Sure. So we had a call with Greg, and I think it was Bart Carroll and Pelham Green from Wizards of the Coast team, and just figured out how to do it. And we basically took the Stream of Annihilation idea, but made it Podcast of Annihilation, where we took 10 different podcasts and a couple of different guests, put them in to those individual shows to help put forth the idea of collaboration and community, not competition between all of us, because we're all just there to play a game together and make stories. And what's competitive about that? Nothing.
And it's a win-win-win for Wizards, because
Yes.
if a rising tide will lift all ships. So if they can demonstrate how many people are into this and how many people are making content around it, that's going to help their branding.
Exactly. Since the Stream of Annihilation had a lot of streamers, Podcast of Annihilation didn't alienate the podcasters anymore. It brought that audience in. So for us, we wouldn't have our shows without Wizards of the Coast. So for us, it was kind of paying homage to them of going, hey, thank you for having a product that we, like, you don't ping us for copyright problems and letting us use it and making great stuff. And they said, sure, come in. We'll give you the new module for free. Just use it and make content, and we'll do something cool out of it. So we did it. And the first event I did like half of the planning for. I got 5 different podcasts, and Greg and his team got 5 different podcasts, including like Brian Posehn's Nerd Poker. We had the Drunks and Dragons team. I got D&D's for Nerds from Australia. So we had multiple countries in it at this point, which was a show that I thoroughly enjoyed before I even met them. And now at this point in time, they've guested on our show for other future events. So that was the first event, and it went great. And then something happened which I was hoping would happen, which was a woman, Victoria Rogers from Canada, who's the DM of the Broadswords. She reached out to me and said, hey, I loved what you did. I would like to run one too. I went, yes, this is good. I want a collaboration. I want people to want to work together. So she made the Podcast of Foes, which was bringing 23 podcasts together, which we admitted was a lot afterward, but it was a cool experience of just seeing 23 different one-shots using different villains, using a new book that they came out with. And then after that, Victoria and I wanted to keep working, and we both reached out to Greg. And Greg said, well, why don't you guys just work together? Further honing in that idea of collaboration. So Victoria and I co-wrote and co-produced the Podcast of Waterdeep series, which we actually wrote a continuous story over 10 episodes, like a loose outline. And then we had 10 different shows with a bunch of guests brought in and told this huge story. So instead of in Podcast of Annihilation, you can just listen to whatever groups you knew. In this one, you listen to all of them because they all told the same story. And it really drove home the idea that we're not just doing this so that way people can listen to everyone, just have guests. We're actually working together. And having a chat with 10 different DMs trying to figure out how this story works was wonderful.
And just for reference at home, DMs is Dungeon Master.
Dungeon Master, yeah. They're the people who run the game, and then you have the players.
So what form is this taking? Because you have all these podcasts working together on these episodes. Is one episode living on each of their individual podcasts, or are folks tuning into this new podcast and hearing all of these different teams producing their own episodes?
Yes. So we got the episodes and we threw them onto our individual feeds, but they mostly lived and were premiered on the D&D Dungeon Delve feed. And the Dungeon Delve feed existed for a long time, not doing much. It started back 2010 or so, like when Will Wheaton was on the show, the Penny Arcade guys, Chris Perkins, who is the creative director. He's a really high up position at Wizards of the Coast. He ran that game. That's where all the PAX or Penny Arcade Expo live shows originated, was that. Patrick Rothfuss is in there now. But because they didn't have any games, that feed was kind of dead. And I pitched to Greg back in Podcast of Annihilation, why don't we revamp that RSS feed you've had and just make it a place of community and these events, which is what happened. So now that got new life. So we've had Podcast of Annihilation, we've had Foes, we've had Waterdeep. Another group, I believe is the D20 Dames, has started a Podcast of Ravnica. And then all of that turned into 48 of us, 48? Yes, 48 of us from UK, Australia, Canada, and the US all over, going to LA for D&D Live 2019 back in March, April, I don't even know what month it is anymore, where we announced the new book, Descent into Avernus. And there was more of a little convention. We actually had fans get tickets, like a convention, show up. The entire lot of Line 204 Studios was set up as hell, because that's where the module took place. And in the back, in one of the rooms, you had 4 pods with glass on the back that the audience, like the people who paid for tickets, could look in and see us recording and streaming to 4 different channels simultaneously all day, each of the days. So behind us was Joe Manganiello's shop, as Joe is just sitting back there looking like Joe on his stool selling his shirts. And in front of him is just a bunch of nerds goofing off and pretending we're going through hell on war machines. It was an amazing experience to be in, especially we never thought we would meet the D&D is for Nerds guys in person. They're in Australia. We're in New York. The chances of that happening are very slim, but we all made it to LA and we were actually able to do this event that originated as an internet, you'll interact with some people event, to we're all together in the same space, having drinks together, playing together, and just being happy, man. It was great.
That's awesome. So you talked about how exciting, that is, collaborating with other podcast creators.
Yeah.
What kinds of positive impacts has that collaboration had on your podcast projects?
Well, besides from getting wonderful friends out of it, honestly, most of my friends that I have now are from that community, because we all have that hobby together. We all enjoy the game and the space and the people. It's a wonderful thing. But for the show itself, we've had now guests from the Venture Maidens on our main campaign. Zach Valenti, as I said before, was our main villain. Krista DiMercurio was a voice in the first campaign as well. We have a bunch of different side projects where we pull in guests from all these different shows that we've worked on. I've guested on, I've lost count the amount of shows now. So we've now just started trading players, basically. And if you follow one person and go, oh, well, if you liked this project, you heard this guest, and if you like that guest, you should go to their podcast. And then they go there and they go, oh, that had this cool guest. Why don't we go to their podcast? And it's just become a big web, and you'll more than likely see one of those podcasters in a scattershot of podcasts just from the amount that we work together. Mm-hmm. At all of these events, what we tend to do is go, oh, I like you. You should be on our show. And that usually turns into something within the next couple months.
You said something earlier that really stuck with me, and I hope does stick with me beyond this recording. And that's, if you're going to release something on a schedule, make sure you stick to that schedule.
Yeah.
If you're going to set a schedule for yourself, it becomes an expectation for your viewership or your listeners or your fan base. What are some other pieces of advice that you may have for people who want to take a passion and express that through content, whether that's a video series, a podcast they're trying to produce, anything that might be an expression through content of something they absolutely love?
just because you love something does not mean you will enjoy every step of it. That is very prominent in just the amount of stages that exist. I don't like networking with people just for the reason of maybe quote unquote, or not even quote unquote, making money off of it or trying to expand viewership. I try to make every experience that I have it's working with people that I enjoy working with. Otherwise, what's the point? I'd rather not make money personally and make a friend and promote somebody else's thing that I enjoy. So that's a part of the business that I don't really enjoy, but I have to do it because if I don't, then we don't expand our viewership. I know some people don't like to edit. That's fair. Editing is a lot, and I'm a professional editor. I can tell you it gets to be a lot, especially if you edit as your job. You go home and you edit as your hobby, and then you repeat. It can get old a little quick. But if you don't edit, the thing that you love won't get put into the world. It's like people who love writing. You can write all you want, but sometimes you need to edit your writing. And if you don't edit your writing, it may not become better. There's also people who love writing who hate to write, which is a whole in itself. But I found with everything you're going to do, especially things that require hard work, which most things do, you're going to have to do something you don't want to do. And that's okay, because hopefully the stuff that you love to do will counterbalance that. And even better, if you can find somebody to do the stuff you don't want to do and you can afford it, you can do that too.
Josh, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you and your work, both in the day job sense, but also in these passions and hobbies that you've turned into a second career and the communities that you have helped build around them, which is really, really inspiring to me and hopefully inspiring to our listeners at home. What's the best way for folks to keep up to date with what you're doing, the projects you're working on? Where can they tune in and follow along with your work?
Sure. We'll start with podcast stuff first. You can find me on Twitter at Xyroxis the Beard, the best spelling thing possible. It's at XIROXIS the Beard. You can find the Taking Initiative podcast at TI_pod or any other links possible at takinginitiativepodcast.com. If you look in iTunes or Spotify, if you just look for Taking Initiative, you'll find us. Besides from that, you can find my personal work in the world of TV and film. Currently, I am the online editor for the 10th season of Blue Bloods on CBS. I was just one of the co-finishing artists for The Righteous Gemstones on HBO, which I believe is currently going on now. And yeah, you'll see my name pop up here and there. But if you're interested in other movies or shows that I worked on, you can always find me on IMDb. Just put in my name and you can find me from there.
Well, Josh Perault, thanks so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope we get to chat on all things nerddom again soon.
Agreed. Thank you very much for having me, guys.